Welcome back to the Bite Pod. My name is Anne. I'm the host of the Bite Pod, and today I'm joined by Anne-Marie and Tijana. Welcome to both of you. I'll introduce Anne-Marie. She's a recent graduate of Mount Allison University in New Brunswick, Canada, and there she studied the intersection between religion and the climate crisis. Anne-Marie is passionate about amplifying the connection between religion and global challenges. So, Anne-Marie, welcome. We're excited to have you. And Tijana, we were just discussing before the call, is someone with a truly global background and a wealth of experience in renewable energy. Originally from Serbia, but grew up in Zimbabwe. She holds a Bachelor's in Science in Electrical Engineering and an MSc in Engineering Physics. She specialized in renewable energy and obtained both of those degrees in Germany. She's a certified renewable energy and climate. She's certified in renewable energy in climate financing as well as SME financing. And her career has been marked by amazing work with NGOs in Zimbabwe and Kenya. And she spent 5 years at the International Renewable Energy Agency in Abu Dhabi. She has played a pivotal role in helping governments develop policies for accelerated renewable energy development, has established entrepreneurship support facilities in Southern and West Africa, provided capacity building and support for SMEs in the energy sector, and is now based back in Serbia, where she offers advisory services for renewable energy development across sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Europe. And finally, she supports private sector companies in Europe, across Europe, with their sustainability reporting. So, Tijana, we are so excited to have your expertise on the podcast, and thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about this ever-trending topic.
Great. So before we move on to our day's topic of ESG, I do want to touch briefly on Bite. So at Bite, we have a back-end AI-based trade data platform with hundreds of millions of records that inform customer analysis and drives our compliance and risk management tools. We also have a Bite web app that allows users to quickly look up sanctions lists, commodity control lists, cyber risks, PEPs, beneficial ownership, and coming soon, a wealth of ESG data as well. So our topic is very timely. So our app provides a repeatable process for supply chain screening and combines entity lists and commodity lists for a quick pre-screening and accurate lookup tool. We also have a number of entity and commodity lists already in the app that are focused and related to forced labor compliance. And with that, I will hand it over to Anne-Marie and Tijana to discuss ESG and get us started. So over to you, Anne-Marie.
Okay, thank you. To start off, I'll just define what ESG means. Environmental social governance approaches that seek to improve the culture and well-being of companies that have positive impacts on critical global issues, including pollution, carbon emissions, forced and child labor, and strategic trade controls. Companies involved in international trade deal with several ESG issues that can be addressed through proactive supply chain risk management approaches. Okay, are you ready, Tijana?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the first question is, ESG is a relatively new concept and one that may not be the forefront of our typical listeners' minds. Can you give us a bit of a background on yourself and what a career focused on ESG looks like and how it touches on global trade compliance?
Right. So, as was mentioned before, my background is in renewable energy, and I was quite unaware that I was working actually in the ESG sector. And I believe that we are all somehow interconnected to the sector. Because if we can even call it a sector, but of course, a couple of years ago, ESG was not even coined in that way as ESG, but it sort of stemmed from, let's say, a mixture of CSR, so corporate social responsibility, and EHS, environment, health, and safety. So it's a very trending field. Regulations are coming up left, right, and center. And it's our job to sort of make sense of all of this and comply with what needs to be complied with. So it's a very dynamic sector and career that path, but I believe it's one that touches us all, whether we're aware of it or not, directly or indirectly. And how it touches on trade issues is exactly because ESG compliance is going in the direction of asking companies to take an introspective look at their operations and their supply chain, and sort of look at areas that before have not being looked at adequately. So in terms of how we are sourcing our materials and the commodities that we are importing, exporting, but within our supply chain, how ethically were these products actually sourced and produced at the end of the day. So it's really trying to ask companies to take this closer look on things that they may have been overlooking, because they are running into risks by not looking into these areas. So we're talking not only environment, as you said, but social aspects, or our impact on the environment, on our societies and our communities at large, but also looking at how we're compliant. So under the governance aspect of ESG, how companies are complying with different regulations, financial reporting and all of that. So that's why I say it's quite an all-encompassing term. A lot of things fall under it. I mean, even somebody who works in HR is de facto working in ESG. But in terms, again, of this trade compliance is looking at now the whole supply chain. So it's not only good enough to look at what we're doing, but also where we're sourcing our products from. And as we are trading them across borders and into different jurisdictions that have stricter regulations that pertain to ESG, it's creating a huge shift and a big stir for different companies and different commodity trading. So it's definitely a very important topic to start looking into, and also engaging in debate on how we can structure this initiative in the most just and equitable way.
Wow, I think you said that perfectly. I can move on to the next question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so when discussing ESG, many people argue that it's hard to measure and to implement because it's not universal. Can you point our listeners to some frameworks that you've seen and speak to how we can get to a place where ESG is universally understood or measured among business?
I think with time, it will converge to be a bit more streamlined and universal. You're right, in different areas of the globe. I mean, we are interconnected through trade with different regions or countries in the world, but they all have different regulations in place, and that's where sort of these discrepancies arise. But again, this interconnectedness and just forcing a product to have to comply with certain regulations in an importing country is going to make those areas of the world that are producing this product to have to start also looking into all of these regulatory issues in order to stay competitive within that market that they're exporting to. So indeed, we are still at sort of these transition stages or very beginning stages of ESG, and sort of companies restructuring themselves internally to see where they need to build a team and which frameworks should they use and for reporting and things like that. But in Europe, we are seeing more standards coming in place and different guidelines on what we have to be reporting on and how. But really, the skeletal framework of all of this is the GRI, so the Global Reporting Initiative, that has a framework and guidelines on how reporting in this sector is really being done. And then in Europe, the regulations are sort of reporting guidelines are being tweaked a little bit so that what needs to be reported more on in terms of European regulations is included in this reporting. But indeed, at the moment, it's still very confusing, and there's not necessarily a structure in place on a global level. But eventually, we will see this convergence, especially because we're so interconnected in terms of trading.
Mm-hmm.
Anne-Marie, can I jump in for a second?
Yes.
Yeah. So, no, I'm loving this question and answer. And Tijana, I'm just like taking a step back. Obviously, like there are these reporting requirements, and I know your background. I think all three of us, our background is like, like we want to do good for the environment. We want to do good for the planet, right? But from like a business bottom line perspective, other than like a reporting requirement, what incentive does a business have, or like how can we show businesses that like this will be good for them too? I know this wasn't in the script. I'm putting you on the spot. But just like it just, I think that's a question people are wondering, I have these reporting requirements, but like, what's it really going to do for me?
No, exactly. I mean, this is actually the key thing to consider, and this is the criticism that ESG is faced with: is that it's a top-down approach enforced on companies. You have to start reporting, but companies are thinking, well, what's in it for me? Well, the essence of what ESG is actually trying to achieve is create these efficiencies for the company to actually, at the end of the day, even have these financial competitive edge by complying with certain regulations. So it's not only that they're doing good for external environment, society, but they are also introducing efficiencies within their chain. Supply chain and within their operations that eventually will give them that competitiveness as more regulations come online. So, for example, if we take carbon emissions, just by having to report on how much carbon is embedded in a unit of some product, we start seeing that, for example, if we're exporting to the European Union and it's asking us to declare the carbon, and I think we'll talk about this later in terms of the CBAM, but eventually we will have to, with this declaration, we also then have to apply for carbon credits and pay for these carbon credits. So at the end of the day, we have this carbon tax imposed. So it's really giving us an opportunity until we get to the stage in a couple of years where we are going to have this carbon tax. It's giving us the stage right now to prepare in time and reorganize ourselves to introduce these efficiencies where we can, so that we are producing or sourcing our product with as little a carbon footprint as possible in order to stay competitive in the market that we already occupy a space in. So it's using operational efficiencies, minimizing risks of various climate change risks. It's increasing also our ability to source financing, because the financial sector is also increasingly looking at companies' ESG activity and looking at the risks and within ESG that companies are starting to address and prepare for. So all of this is also allowing for companies to access easier financing, things like that. So it's going to be a win-win situation once it's organized well and everything starts being more streamlined.
Thank you. That was, just what I was looking for. So thank you so much. Anne-Marie, I'll give it back to you for your next question.
Okay. As you said, governments have implemented various ESG laws and regulations. What seems to be working well, and what areas need improvement?
Yeah, a lot of things are working well and a lot of things need improvement. So as with all new things and with regulations being imposed, a lot of entities have taken it upon themselves to sort of corner this new trend by, for example, coming up with some ESG scoring. And there is, for example, very little transparency in how ESG scoring is actually done by these different entities. And I'm not going to mention any because I don't want to single anyone out, but just from the sheer fact that there is a lack of transparency and not enough regulation put in place on how do you now actually start scoring somebody on the premise of something that is not actually quantifiable and measurable in that sense, because a lot of what we're talking about in ESG doesn't actually have a quantifiable, measurable effect. And in fact, ESG is less about us comparing ourselves to our competitors. That is important, but I would say it's secondary to the actual goal of trying to look at how we can progressively be better and measure ourselves to our past selves. So introducing efficiencies that 2 years ago we were working one way, but now we're better. And in 5 years' time, we have this goal to attain in terms of our sustainability and ESG criteria. So I find a big issue and gap in regulation is that it's not adequately addressing this ESG scoring that a lot of companies, even financial institutions are taking into account. And it's just, giving way to a lot of greenwashing for companies and also underplaying or not giving enough credit to companies that are actually trying quite hard.
That's a good point. I did have a question kind of around what you just said. I sometimes wonder if ESG is almost like a Band-Aid, but not addressing the root cause. Because if someone's not trying to do ethical things for just the point of it's ethical or like the intrinsic value, rather than trying to be like competitive or there's like that money motivation behind it, like it's better for stakeholders or investors. Sometimes I wonder if that's the issue. Like it shouldn't be because you have to follow regulation. It should be because you shouldn't be forcing children into labor or like destroying the environment. Exactly. So I wonder how you address that aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the important thing going forward, and that's also why a debate is important on it, and also one of the reasons why it's heavily politicized in some areas of the world. It's considered ESG as a left or a right thing and things like that, but really it's about trying to create this win-win situation for the company itself and its operations in the world and the traces it's leaving behind in the world as it's creating profit. And of course, every company wants it's a given that they need to create profit. But how are you going to really fairly create that profit over somebody that's trying really hard in terms of environmental impact, social things, and things like that, but it might currently has been falling out of competitiveness on the market because there just necessarily isn't enough awareness amongst consumers on ethically produced goods and things. So ESG is really trying to create this mechanism of, well, let's now look at all, for now it's for the big players, at least in Europe, but let's look at everybody's supply chain and let's really try to make consumers quite aware of where their products are really coming from, and let's also make the companies aware of where their products are coming from, because they may not have been aware that they had some traces of, let's say, child labor involved in some of their raw material sourcing, and that's really just a ticking bomb eventually in terms of reputational risk. It's also a problem in increasing the financial risk for them as well, because eventually, with such activity, they will have less access to financing, rightly so, and things like that. So yeah, it's got a long way to go, but I think we're on the right track.
Okay. For the fourth question, you touched on CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which places tariffs on carbon-intensive products. Can you expand a bit? When the regulations are fully in place, what are some of the significant changes we should see? Do you think there will be an alternative path of trade business that businesses will take to get around the regulations?
It will be very, very difficult to go around the regulations because, so in essence, what the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, is trying to curtail is this carbon leakage. So we know that products that are or carbon intensive products. So we're talking iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizer, and all of these carbon intensive commodities. So if they were produced in the EU, the carbon emissions are being accounted for, and if it's above some cap, then they have to buy carbon credits on the market at a price that the market is selling them at. Then what a lot of companies have done is taken their manufacturing to areas or jurisdictions in the world where these regulations or this carbon pricing mechanism doesn't exist, and then they have been producing them there and then importing them into Europe. So this created this carbon leakage, and Europe is, in its efforts to decarbonize, is trying to account for this. So for now, there is no tariff being put in place per se. For now, these commodities just have to declare their carbon emissions. There is a lot of hurdles and confusion also on how that should be done and who is auditing this. So it's still in its beginning stages, but reporting does have to be done in terms of customs declarations. Everything coming into the EU borders in terms of these commodities needs to have a carbon measurement to it. And then eventually, as of, I believe, 2026, they will then have to start now participating on the carbon market. So then there will be a carbon tax on it. And by then, the mechanisms will be fully put in place for in terms of declaring this and auditing this and things like that.
Okay. But like you said, it's on the right path.
Tijana, I'm going to put you on the spot quickly. Do you know of anything similar in the US by any chance, or is it primarily the EU focused on the carbon emissions right now?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually am not sure about the US. I believe, yes, there is a carbon trading scheme in the US, but I'm really not, I can't speak to it. But many countries, I mean, even China is looking at creating a carbon trading scheme and putting a carbon tax on certain commodities. So a lot of countries are going on board with that. So I'm sure absolutely in the US it exists.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Are these initiatives, whether government or private, like fair trade certifications, going to have a positive impact on our environment?
Yeah, I think they already do. But in terms of certification, there are different sort of qualities of what these certifications really mean. So if it's like ISO certifications, that's of course the gold international standard. But then, we can have different certifications that we're not really sure what they mean. And I'm always thinking that whenever I buy a can of tuna, I'm always looking for some little fish logo, but I don't even actually know what these fish logos really mean. Or, when my husband buys wine, he always brags that he bought a really good wine because it won an award in 2022. But which award, or every second is a bestseller. So it's the same with sort of certifications. Sometimes we don't exactly know what they are. So that's another thing where a little bit of regulatory tightening needs to be put in place so that we are sure that this is certifying exactly this, which is informing our decision making in terms of what products we're buying and how we are creating the demand for these products. But over the decades, the different certifications schemes that have existed have gone a long way in exactly this, creating this awareness amongst consumers, so that at least they've started thinking that they want to more ethically source, and they're comparing different products, for example, where did it come from, or which certification does it have behind it? A long way yet to go, but it's definitely, again, on the right track and going to have a good impact, as long as it's not a cause for any kind of greenwashing. And again, that's where regulation needs to come into play to make sure that somebody hasn't just come up with some certification that looks nice, has a nice logo, but doesn't really address much.
So, Tijana, you've mentioned, I'm going to hop in again, Anne-Marie, sorry. You've mentioned twice now, both around the standards and around the certifications, that there's not there's not a standard. Sorry to use the same word twice, but there's no uniformity to the standards. There's no uniformity to the certifications. You mentioned the standards, the GRI standards that are kind of, universally accepted, and ISO certifications. I guess just to say, how can our listeners or anyone in business start to navigate through those? If, you look at a set of standards, how do you decide, okay, these are the standards I, want to report on, or these are the standards I want to meet, or this is the certification that I'm going to value? Do you have any recommendations on where, people can get that kind of information, or do you just recommend that they look across all of them and pick which align with their values? Do you have any recommendations in that space?
Yeah. So I think, firstly, it's looking at if there is any regulation that's going to point you into what is a priority for you to concentrate on. But at the end of the day, whether we're a small company, a large company, it doesn't, and if we fall under any ESG reporting mechanism or not, it's very good to start already looking into our operations and preemptively preparing for the world of ESG, which is inevitably going to affect every sort of business. There is not really a one-stop that I would refer to. Definitely the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative standards, guidelines are a good place to start. But some of them could, are a little bit too comprehensive and span so many areas that are not necessarily applicable to some line of work. But that would be a good place to start. And then looking also at more putting a lens on the supply chain, even though we might have a very small supply chain, maybe we're just dealing with two companies, but let's actually start looking at all of these different guidelines and asking our companies more than just what is the price for me to source this product from you, but also where exactly are you growing that cotton, and what are your working conditions like, and do you have a report, some kind of sustainability, some newsletter that I can refer to and make a more of an informed decision on whether I will next year be sourcing from you, or it's worthwhile to start looking at somebody who's actually doing a lot more in terms of sustainability, and then I can also brand my product as sustainably sourced and things like that. So it's I think just creating this awareness amongst companies that we really need to, for our own sake, and introducing efficiencies in our own operations, to start having this introspective look into our operations, but as well as our supply chain, and making more informed decisions beyond just the price on the product that we're sourcing.
Definitely. Anne-Marie, do you have any final questions? I have one more, but I wanted to check in with you.
I do have one final question. When you talk about we're bringing awareness to companies about kind of like giving them the ability to see what the sources are and then make informed decisions that are maybe better decisions, I always wonder about really big businesses, like maybe Amazon is a really big business, and I wonder how you kind of hold them accountable for their impacts on the world. And like, I don't know, how do you bring awareness to a company that's that big and powerful, kind of?
Yeah. So Amazon having headquarters in the US is, I can't really speak to US regulation so much, but in terms of its subsidiaries in the EU, they have to under the CSRD, so the Corporate Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive of the EU. Even companies that are headquartered outside of the EU but have significant business in the EU need to also, along with financial reporting, also equally produce their sustainability reporting on an annual basis. And eventually it will also be stricter and stricter how this is being audited. So just like a financial report that is being audited by a certified financial accountant, sustainability reporting will equally be audited by sustainability auditors, certified, and then eventually, the space for any kind of greenwashing will become very, very small, and also these reports have to be publicly available, so anybody will be able to go and have a look at what's being reported, and that also opens the door for a lot of people who know if something was wrongly put in there or is not justified adequately. They can point this out, and it's just going to again create this demand side management, so that we also, as consumers, not necessarily as any kind of business owners, but as consumers, will also have more of a look at what these companies are doing and whom we are supporting by paying them for different goods and services. So it's really trying to create a little bit more of sustainability and ethics in business practices.
Yeah, and to that point, Tijana, I know the SEC here in the US does publish a list if they are finding companies who have said, reported one thing on their ESG and sustainability reporting, and then they've been found to either be lying or being doing something that's not aligned with what they're reporting that they do. They are fined, and we have, a published list of those. It's not very long, but it's I think that's headed in the right direction.
Yeah. But look, at the end of the day, it's also not about us wanting to really, catch somebody, but it's really more about, as we discussed in the beginning, ask companies to really get their act together. I mean, because at the end of the day, it's for their own good to make sure that they're creating profit, but not damaging anybody else along the way. And if I can just give an example here, also the value I find in ESG is that it's trying to put this value on a lot of public goods. So if we look at a public good like air, nobody has to pay for using air, but we all need it. But obviously, it's more valuable to breathe clean air than to breathe polluted air. And if we are breathing polluted air, at the end of the day, it's going to reflect on our health bill at the end of the day. And so we want to make sure that somebody is not only held accountable, but just not doing this in the first place. So just because they're going to keep polluting because of lack of regulation in that jurisdiction, and even if they're fined for this and whatnot, it doesn't change the fact that the air is polluted. So it's about just not doing that and continuing for you to make profit and making sure there are no bigger socioeconomic costs associated to this.
The public health in me loves that response, Tijana. So thank you for summing it up that way. I think that was fantastic. And you mentioned a lot throughout all of this about efficiencies. And that's one thing here at Byte that we are really focused on is bringing everything together and making it more efficient, streamlining processes, helping get all the information that someone needs in one place. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we are working to get additional ESG data into the app. We do have a few lists right now, but to your point, Tijana, the lists we have right now are more kind of violators or, people who have been seen doing something potentially that, isn't great. But our goal is to bring the standards and the certifications and all of that into the app so that people can begin to build out their reporting systems or look at the certifications of suppliers in their supply chain. So not only look and see if their supplier has gotten caught for doing something they shouldn't, but also do they have a certification and comparing certifications and all of that. So we are on the right track, I think, in terms of bringing that all into one place. And again, helping companies with efficiencies, as you've mentioned a few times during this conversation.
I would also just like to mention that this is the pain point in ESG and looking into your supply chain. And I think Byte is going to have a big value add for companies that need to report on their supply chain to really look into Byte and try to see where there are some red flags and how they can talk with their suppliers to help them help us to become more sustainable and competitive.
Great. Anne-Marie, any final thoughts from you?
No, thank you for taking time to answer my questions.
You're most welcome.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I said you're most welcome. And yeah, I always enjoy these discussions with you. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. I really wish we could end on your last point, Tijana, but we will wrap up now. That is another episode of the Byte Pod. We hope you enjoyed exploring ESG with us today. Tijana, we hope to have you back again in the future, especially as regulations continue to change. So for everyone listening, don't forget to check us out on social media. We have Instagram and LinkedIn. And if you're interested in a demo of Byte, please feel free to reach out to us either on our website, which is bytedata.io, or you can email us anytime at info@bytedata.io. We do offer 14-day free trials of the app, and you can sign up for that trial directly on our website. So thank you, Anne-Marie and Tijana, once again. It was a pleasure having you, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.